Lillahi Rabbil Alameen, As-salatu was-salamu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And thank you for joining us today. My name is Muhammad Jalal from the Thinking Muslim Project, an initiative aimed at developing thought about Islam's response to modernity. For some time, we've been in discussions with the good brothers and sisters from Al-Arqam Academy, Al-Arqam Institute, to begin a course looking at the subject of Usul al-Fiqh, which alhamdulillah, by Allah's grace and mercy, today we begin. In my view, what will be delivered over these 19 weeks is necessary for all Muslims that look to develop a greater structured understanding of Islam. And I know many of you have come here today after attending our Thinking Muslim course, looking at aspects of Islam and liberalism. I see very much today's learning as complementary to the discussions I know many of you have been having with me. And for those of you that want to attend our course, we have recently launched another course, information available on our website, thinkingmuslim.com, and on our Twitter page. Now, I'm really honored to introduce this course looking at aspects of Usul al-Fiqh, the science of derivation of Islamic law, its terms and concepts, how the science emerged, the vital role it plays in the individual and socio-political sphere, hosted by Al-Arqam Institute. For those of you who don't know, Al-Arqam Institute is an initiative that seeks to facilitate improving Islamic literacy amongst Muslims in a way that builds critical thinking as well as a commitment to Islam. While not every Muslim will engage in scholarly pursuit of Islamic sciences and their detailed inner workings, it is of great importance for Muslims to understand different ideas from such sciences in order to meaningfully understand such issues from the perspective of the revelation from our Creator, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I think it is of particular importance to those of you who occupy the da'wah space. I have felt, and I know we have felt for some time, that the activism and the many shades of activism that exist in the Muslim community is often not backed up with depth, whether that's a depth of understanding of the reality of the world around us, or in the case of today's course, a depth of understanding of Islam. And I think sometimes that's a major failing. And inshallah ta'ala, we all hope to remedy this with courses like the one you're going to attend today. Now, Al-Arqam Institute's content can be currently found on Facebook and YouTube, and it's a vast treasure trove of really interesting and enlightening ideas. Topics range from Aqidah. There's a set of videos that present the core Islamic concepts in light of dominant ideas, such as scientism and rational proofs for Islam. There are topics that are posted on Hadith. Recently, they had a series on Hadith on women, a series focused on how to view a Hadith overall and look at some of the most commonly cited Hadith related to women and how the West in particular, or the liberal West, they use to defame concepts within Islam. You may also find plenty of Jummah khutbahs that address the socio-political incidents and events around the world. And that's updated on a very regular basis. In fact, updated on a weekly basis. And there's much more there. And you can, I'm sure the brothers will post in the discussion box a link to the YouTube and Facebook pages, inshallah. Now, this course will, inshallah, serve as an overall landscape to the science of Usul al-Fiqh, or the theory behind how Islamic law is derived, the importance of which will be highlighted in today's class. Attendees should note that the course is a broad overview and at times will address multiple topics within a single session, although many topics deserve a session in and of themselves. Inshallah, this can start as a precursor to further courses with studies in selected topics in some more depth. Now, one last point I want to make before I pass on to Muhammad Karim who's going to be the convener, the host of today, I suppose it's the teacher in me speaking here, and that is that although this is a free course, this shouldn't reflect your seriousness and approach to this topic and to this series over the next 19 weeks. Please make sure you take plenty of notes, ask questions, and engage as comprehensively as you can with the content and with the discussions that take place on Google Classroom, which I'm sure Mohammed Kareem will mention in his introduction. So without any further points, Mohammed, if you'd like to introduce today, inshallah.
Okay, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. My name is Mohammed Kareem, and like Brother Jalal mentioned, I am the course moderator. So I'm just going to be covering some ground rules, inshallah. As you all may know, the course will be conducted on both Zoom and Google Classroom. So the in-person sessions will be covered on Zoom, which you all are here right now, alhamdulillah. And the rest of the communication, like things like readings, announcements, optional assignments, those will be posted on the Google Classroom, inshallah. So if you haven't joined the Google Classroom, please do so. I believe you are required to have a Gmail account. If you don't have a Gmail, you're unfortunately not able to sign up. So please try to either utilize your Gmail accounts or make one for the course. It helps with the course experience overall, because that is basically our platform for communication, for readings, for shared materials. Class recordings as well will be posted and available on the Google Classroom after each session. And there also will be brief quizzes, just because it does help with engagement and retention of material. And for those who do complete them all, there will be certificates. More information regarding this will be coming soon, but that is something to get excited about. We ask for patience due to the class size. We have about 150 attendees registered. And while we don't expect everyone to be in attendance at all times, in order to address the number of participants, we have designated the last around 45 minutes of each session for Q&A, and that will be done through a system. So if you guys are able to, please message myself with your questions throughout the session, and it will be sent up to the presenter, inshallah. And if more time is needed for things like Q&A, we can also make use of the Google Classroom, and we can make use of things like office hours. That being said, we do ask you to disable your mics and videos for the session. We're just going to go through that system, and to prevent any interruptions, we'll just, we'll go through this particular system. And lastly, please make sure to make use of Al-Arqam Institute's YouTube account and its Facebook pages. You are able to contact us from there, and there are plenty of resources available, and like Brother Jalal mentioned, for a wide variety of other topics. Now for today's instructor, we have Brother Muhammad Hanini. Brother Muhammad has a BA in Islamic History and a Master's in Islamic Studies with a focus on fiqh. Brother Muhammad is currently a lecturer at American Open University for Usul al-Fiqh, Hadith, and Islamic contracts. And most currently, he conducts classes in local masajid in North Carolina. So without further ado, Brother Muhammad.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa salatu wa salamu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin Nabil Ummi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Just as a quick intro, what we are going to cover today, inshallah ta'ala, is not really, we're not going to get into usul al-fiqh itself, but we're going to get into some terminologies to understand where usul al-fiqh fits within the framework of Islam, within the Islam as a whole, as a system. Where does usul al-fiqh fit in? And highlight the importance of it, inshallah ta'ala. So what we are expecting, for that, what you will get out of this course, inshallah, is that you will understand a general, you will have an overview of usul al-fiqh and an introduction. You'll have the introduction, you'll have the knowledge of the introduction by the introduction of the course, to understand how it is set up, what is usul al-fiqh, what type of the importance of it, how it is structured, etc. And again, it is on, I don't want to say on a high level, but it is definitely an introductory basis. We'll see how usul fiqh actually relates to the various practical spheres, the various practical aspects of the Muslim Ummah at large, as individuals and as a nation, as a whole. And because usul fiqh, while it deals with the structure of approaching the Islamic text, it deals with a framework of understanding of the Islamic text. It tends to be viewed as theoretical science, but in reality, it is the foundation, it is the basis that results or that yields the practical aspects, the rules that govern the practical aspects of life as a whole. So while it is many aspects are theoretical, but they come into play to derive the practical rules, as we will come to see, inshallah ta'ala. And hopefully, inshallah, we will develop by studying it, by going through the 19 weeks, you'll develop an appreciation and hopefully an interest to further study it and to take it a step further. And definitely there's a lot more that can be studied and delved into. But hopefully this will ignite the interest. And since we're talking about the 19 weeks, just as a brotherly advice, stick with it. I understand in today's standards it's a long time, but we do what we do. We learn, we study, etc. as an act of ibadah to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanded the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, وَقُلْ رَبِّي زِدْنِي عِلْمًا, and Allah ta'ala says that the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam to commanded him to ask Allah, وَقُلْ رَبِّي, and say, oh my Lord, increase me in knowledge. And some ulama said that if there was something better than knowledge, Allah ta'ala would have guided him to ask for it. It is that is ibadah. That's the highest form of ibadah for the Muslim. Take it as long or short. Take it as this is what we Muslims live for, to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is part of that worship. And therefore, stick with it, inshallah ta'ala. And you will benefit, and inshallah ta'ala, you will enrich the course and the presenters and the discussion to benefit your brothers and sisters, inshallah. So, don't look at the 19 weeks, look at what you were really, inshallah ta'ala, engaged in, and inshallah it will be beneficial to everybody. Okay, so let's start with the when we complete this course, and this is what the roadmap, if you wish, of usul fiqh and the topic of usul fiqh. We will understand what Islamic fiqh is built upon, and to understand that it is a found, well-defined process. It is not as simple as the unaware people would think, that it is simply, here's an ayah, here's a hadith, take it and run with it. It is not like that at all. And it is really a well-defined, well-structured process that is put in place to make sure, that the mistakes are minimized in deducing the laws from the divine text, from the Islamic text. We will understand, inshallah, that usul fiqh provides a connection between the aqeedah and the Islamic fiqh. One basic topic that is presented in usul fiqh is where the law comes from, the legislation, the idea of sovereignty. Who is sovereign? Is it God or is it the human being? And that connects between our belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because our belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not only as a creator, but also as a lawgiver, as a legislator. He is al-Hakim. And therefore, it is that connection that will be realized as well, to see that actually it is very much connected. The structure of understanding is very much connected to the Islamic aqeedah that we have. And also we will see, inshallah, through the course, that Islamic fiqh was not a superimposed, artificial, arbitrary science that was given. Here it is, but actually it is organic and it is innate to Islam itself. And so the structure that's put in place is not based on the whims of somebody, is not based on disliking of this person or that person, but actually it is an organic a component of Islam, and that's how it came about. And inshallah, that will be presented when the discussion about the development of usul fiqh and how it started will be presented. Okay. The Islamic legal system has its own method of interpretation that demands adherence, just like any legal system. Every legal system has its own unique sources, its own way of deriving, of understanding, whether it's a Western legal system, whether it is a Marxist legal system, whether it is an Islamic legal system. each one has its own way of looking at problems, looking at looking at how to derive it, looking at the sources. Where are we going to come up with laws to solve the human problem? And of course, and you will see that the Islamic legal system has those features as well. Inshallah, we'll touch on them towards the end of today's session. The process serves as the criteria. If you can just go back, please. The process serves as the criteria for deriving, legitimizing, and outweighing rulings. So when we talk about usul al-fiqh and the process, this process of understanding, it will help us actually not only how to derive, how to deduce, how to conclude laws or result with laws from the vast number of texts that we have between the Quran, the Sunnah, the Ijma', Qiyas, etc. But also we will understand what is a legitimate rule that is derived, what is an illegitimate rule. Not everything, because I say, well, Allah Ta'ala says this in the Quran, therefore automatically it is legitimate, because it can have many issues. It has that where it did not follow the proper understanding, whether it's based, maybe it went against the language, whether it went against the established hadith, whether it is, so there are many things that can delegitimize a conclusion, so that not every opinion, is legitimate and it is therefore respected. While at the same time, you can have various opinions and various differences of opinions within Islam, amongst the jurists, while following that proper structure, even though parts of the structure are disagreed upon, but still within that framework that Islam allows, then we say that ruling, that conclusion, that ijtihad, that hukum shari is actually a hukum shari. It's a legal rule, and it is a respected rule, even though X or Y can disagree with them or not. And of course, usul al-fiqh is used to, part of it is to weigh out evidences and rulings and how to deal with the various texts. So these are, inshallah ta'ala, some of the course objectives. Inshallah ta'ala, there will be more, and I will mention towards the very end, why we should study usul al-fiqh. I want to add just a few things to this, and inshallah we'll address it towards the end. If you can move forward, please. Okay. So as you see, these are the topics that are going to be covered, inshallah, in the usul and in this course. And we have the course introduction, which is today, and today we'll be discussing the idea or the topic of fiqh. What is fiqh? What is Shari'ah? And what is law? And it's just going to be a highlight, because again, understanding especially the fiqh and the Shari'ah, they will give you an idea where the usul al-fiqh fits in, where within the frame of Islam. It'll give you a rough idea in terms of the comparison with other legal systems when we discuss law. And of course, and it's going to be really just skimming through it. Maybe other instructors would like to cover it more as needed next week or after that. But today we're just going to go skim through it, inshallah. Then next session, inshallah, the next week, it's going to be the usul, the second session, and that will be discussing what definition of usul and what is the definition of usul and the prominent characteristics of usul fiqh. What is usul fiqh? What are the main features of it, etc. Then the next session, it will be more on the historical side. How, as I said, usul fiqh is an organic topic, organic type of knowledge. It is not something that is it's not artificial, superimposed, which means what? It means it existed from the time of Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, the companions and the tabi'een, etc. So we want to see the origins and how it used to be at the early generation and how it developed, and later on it became more codified, etc. The session after it we'll talk about the usuli literature, meaning the types of the approach to usul al-fiqh, where you have the schools of usul al-fiqh, the two main schools of usul al-fiqh, the Hanafi, and the Shafi'i method, and the mixed method. Then myths regarding the usul, addressing some of the issues that are raised about the development of and function of usul al-fiqh. Then the hukum shari, that will be studied in the session after that. What is حكم شرعي, what does it mean to say who's the hakim, who is the lawgiver, who's the legislator, who's sovereign, where does it, who's the end, who decides, if you wish, what is and what is not, what is right, what is wrong, what is halal, what is haram. And that will be the topic, and of course why, and that will be the topic of that session. Then we're talking about the types of ahkam shar'iyya. There are different types of ahkam shar'iyya, or legal or divine rules. Some of them are hukum taklifi, and these go into the fard, mandub, mubah, makruh, and the haram, the 5 categories of the actions. And these are when they're discussed, they are discussed to show really that the actions of the human beings being contained within these 5 categories, and what that means. Then they'll talk. The discussion will be about hukum al-wad'i, also circumstantial command, and that is things like the sabab, the causality, the idea of causality, the idea of the shart, conditions or terms, al-mani', what prevents a hukum, or from coming to be, sahih, batil, fasid, when we talk about contracts and things, addressing the actions and addressing contracts. So that will be the next session, inshallah. If you can go ahead, please. Next subject will be the sources of Shari'ah, and that will be the evidence, its type, certainty, the meaning, where do we derive our law from? What do we derive our law from? Is it from the Quran, from the Sunnah? Is it from the consensus of the people in the room, etc.? These are the subjects, and of course they'll talk about the types of evidence and the conditions for accepting an evidence and the level of acceptance for the evidence, because not all evidence, not all dalil are the same. They're not all created equal. You have the sources of Sharia being the Quran, and that's where the details now start happening. The first source of Sharia is the Quran Kareem. Then the next session will discuss the Sunnah being the second source of Sharia. Then we're talking about the Sharia relationship, or the source of Sharia in terms of their relationship with each other, the Quran and the Sunnah. After that, the session after that, it will be the sources of Sharia as ijma'. Ijma', whose consensus, and we'll talk about what is agreed on, what is disagreed on amongst the Muslim scholars. Then, of course, there's qiyas, and the topic of qiyas being the fourth source of Sharia, qiyas or legal analogy in law. And that will bring us actually to November. And from there, we'll talk about the other sources of Sharia, what they call disagreed upon sources of Sharia, al-mukhtalaf fiha. And that will deal with the concept of maslaha and istihsan, opinions of companions. And you will see that, by the way, it is important because the discussion has to be relevant. You'll see that even those who talk about benefit, maslaha, the well-being of the Muslims, they never intended it to be away from Sharia. It's not like the Islam would say one thing, but I think the benefit for Muslims to be X or Y. And these are some of the topics that will be presented, inshallah ta'ala, discussing the difference or opinions amongst the scholars regarding them, and to also discussing the people who accepted them or the people who rejected them. Still, even amongst the people who accepted them or put them as standards for derived laws or as sources for law, they never intended them to be devoid of or separated from the Islamic, the Quran and the Sunnah, and the Ijma' of Sahaba specifically. Then you're talking about a big topic, especially nowadays, which is the maqasid al-Sharia. What are the maqasid of Sharia? And the difference between the maqasid, or the aims of the Sharia, the role of maqasid, and the neo-maqasid approach. So the textual approach to ijtihad and the neo-maqasid approach that is happening now. And then, of course, the topic of ijtihad. So after you go through all of these, and this again, just a highlight, once after you go through all of these, you see the process of putting them together and developing a relationship, a structure, to do the deduction, to come up with what is called, go the process of ijtihad, trying your utmost to deduce a law. And then we'll talk about the role of the Islamic juristic exertion, and that's ijtihad. And finally, we'll talk about the differences amongst the jurists. Why there are differences? Why is there a quote unquote Hanafi, Shafi'i, why are there are multiple understandings, etc. And Usul al-Fiqh will give you that appreciation, for the maqasid and for the ijtihad and for the difference of opinion. And you will see inshallah that actually having the difference of opinion amongst the jurists is not only a natural thing, but it is actually a healthy thing, as long as they are done within the proper parameters of understanding. Just like in any system, if any system you start bringing rules from left field and right field, without being structured in the accepted norm of deduction, then you are actually harming the system itself. But if you are enriching it by following the agreed upon standards and the correct standards that are part of the system, that are within the system, then that is something that is positive. Okay. Next slide, please, Ahmed. And my apologies for the slides. It's I could not look at my notes and share my screen at the same time. Technically challenged today. But so today, inshallah ta'ala, and this is where we will jump into our topic. What we'll discuss, inshallah ta'ala, today is the Shari'ah, Fiqh, and law. And basically what we're discussing is just terminologies, but they are very important, even though they are not directly, or they are not part of Usul Fiqh itself, but they are the ground, or they are related to integrally related, or closely related to Usul al-Fiqh, to understand again where Usul al-Fiqh fits in the Sharia. What does Fiqh mean? What does Sharia mean? And again, to compare it with the law nowadays. Okay, let's start, inshallah. And that's what today's agenda. Okay. So let's start with the first topic that we want to discuss is actually what is Sharia. So in general, not only Sharia where it has two definitions. In general, normally you have the terms have linguistical definition, and you have technical or convention, the definition. Meaning that just like if you say, for example, as-salah linguistically, it means dua, to supplicate to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yet as a term that's used within Islam, it is amongst the jurists, when you say salah, it automatically what comes to your mind is the term that's the convention, which is the movement, standing, that you start doing to perform the prayer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, starting from takbirat al-ihram, ending with the salam, with the ruku' sujood. That's what comes to mind. The same thing with the zakah. When you say zakah, again, it has normally, this is another word that has the linguistical meaning and a Shari'i meaning, or a conventional meaning, or a technical meaning. They will mean the same thing. And the linguistical meaning for zakah, for example, is to purify, is to purify or to grow, to purify. But when you talk about it as a term, as a technical meaning, when you say zakah, then you say it is a set amount of wealth that is taken out, after it reaches a certain threshold, that's a nisab, and you have a lunar year that passes, etc., and it's given to the 8 categories mentioned in Quran Kareem. These are the same, in the same vein. When we talk about Sharia, there is a technical meaning and there is a linguistical meaning. So when we talk about Sharia from a linguistical meaning, and the linguistic definition, meaning what you see in the lexicon, what you see in the Arabic dictionary, it is a non-exhaustive source of water from which people drink. So meaning what? It is abundant amount of water, that people approach to drink. And this is what when you say Sharia, actually it means the water that's endless. It has no end, and it is obvious. It is you see it in front of you. And so in the Arabic language, you do not call a body of water as Sharia unless it is non-exhaustive. you know, and it is as said in Lisan al-Arab, in the Arabic lexicon by al-Mandur, that it is actually, that it is apparent, you know, and it can be seen. And it's interesting that is used also in reference to Islam, as if Islam and the Islamic law, you know, is non-exhaustive, and it continues, and it needs to be like that, of that nature, if it's going to continue until the day of judgment. So it is a non-exhaustive source of water, and this is and it's used in the Quran, you know, in a specific way. So, for example, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, ثُمَّ جَعَلْنَاكَ عَلَى شَرِيعَةٍ مِنَ الْأَمْرِ فَاتَّبِعْهَا. Thus, we have put you, O Muhammad, on a sharia of the command, you know, of our command, follow it. And this is in Surah Al-Jathiyah. So you find, for example, the explainers, the Mufassirin, and the linguists who talked about it, they explained using this ayah, you know, that it is the body of revelation that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent, the aqidah, the ahkam, the rules, the do's and don'ts, the stories of the past, all of them actually, the akhlaq, the morals that are contained in the sharia, all of them are contained in what is called a sharia. So Khalil bin Ahmad was a linguist, you know, defined the sharia as shara'i, and sharia, and the plural of it is shara'i. He said, ما شرع الله للعباد من أمر الدين. You know, so it's whatever Allah Ta'ala legislated for the servants, you know, for his servants of all matters of religion. You know, so literally everything that Allah Ta'ala revealed to Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam is what is considered to be a sharia. Imam al-Shawkani, the same thing in the explaining this to مَجَعَلْنَاكَ عَلَى شَرِيعَةِ الْأَمْرِ. He said the sharia linguistically, you know, al-madhhab wal-millat wal-minhaj, and it's used for water. So the entire madhab, the entire millah, whatever Allah Ta'ala revealed, and the methodology, it is all called in sharia. And he continues by saying, فَالْمُرَادُ بِالشَّرِيعَةُ هُنَا مَا شَرَعَهُ اللَّهُ لِعِبَادِهِ مِنَ الدِّينِ. That what's intended, the intended meaning here by sharia is what Allah Ta'ala legislated for his servants of the matters of deen. Okay, and so the meaning, he continues, he said, it means we made you, or we gave you, O Muhammad, we put you on a straight path, clear path of the matters of the deen that will let you reach the truth. فَاتَّبِعْهَا. Then follow it. So meaning act upon its rules in your nation, and do not follow the whims and the desires of those who do not know. Okay, so as you see, most scholars tafsir, they give the same understanding. It is the millah, it is the deen, the entirety of the religion. And Al-Qurtubi mentioned that it is a straight path, you know, the straight path or the clear path in the issue of religion. الطريق الواضح, الطريق المستقيم, the straight path in the matters of religion, because that's the subject here. So when he said, وَجَعَلْنَاكَ عَلَى شَرِيعَةٍ مِنْ الْأَمْرِ أي على منهاج واضح من أمر الدين يشرع بك الحق. That means it's a clear path of the matters of the deen that will take you to al-haq. You know, the same thing Abdullah bin Abbas radiallahu anhu said, ala shari'at means on the guidance of the deen, of the matter. And this is the point, that they're all pretty much the same meaning, and referring to what the sharia as being, you know, the straight path, the body of message, the message in its entirety that was revealed to Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Okay, next slide, please. And then in another ayah in Surah Al-Ma'idah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, لِكُلٍّ جَعَلْنَا مِنْكُمْ شِرْعَةً وَمِنْهَاجًا. And here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking about the Muslims and the non-Muslims, that each of you has their own sharia, has their own set of laws and their own message, if you wish, and they have their own path. Okay, and here it is telling Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam basically to follow what was revealed to him, and not what was revealed to the people of the book, or to others. So even though the principles, that the fundamentals between the Islam and the other previous messages revealed to other nations, you know, are the same, it is actually, but there are differences in the methodology, there are differences in the laws, etc. So the fundamentals of the deen are what they share. And that is what they refer to as al-Tawheed, asl al-Tawheed. To worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone, not to associate partners with him, to submit to him subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is unified amongst all the prophets. Yet now the way of life, the way, the rules, the do's and don'ts, these vary from nation to nation. Okay, and this is something that is really mentioned again. when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says شرع لكم من الدين ما وصى به نوحا, Allah ta'ala legislated for you what he legislated for Nuh alayhi salam, and he continues to saying أن أقيموا الدين ولا تتفرقوا فيه, that you establish the religion and do not be divided. So Razi in his tafsir, he's saying that this is where the similarity between them, there is similarity and dissimilarity. In the similarity, it means that which is related to what? Related to the fundamentals of the deen. ما يتعلق بأصول الدين. Anything that's related to the fundamentals of the deen, that is something common. But other than that, every nation or every group has their own, Allah Ta'ala legislated for them their own way of life at different levels. Some of them only, Allah Ta'ala gave them partial rules, and some of them, like the Muslim Ummah, Allah Ta'ala with His rahmah, He's given us extensive rules to live as individuals and as an ummah. So Imam al-Qurtubi, rahimahullah, he says, شرع لكم من الدين, Allah legislated for you. He said that meaning what? That He legislated for you from the deen what He legislated for the people of Noah, Ibrahim, Musa, and Isa. And then He's explained what did He legislate? أن أقيموا الدين. So Qurtubi says, وهو توحيد الله وطاعته. This means it is the monotheism, the deen of monotheism, in the oneness of Allah Ta'ala and the obedience of Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala, وَالْإِيمَانِ بِرُسُلِهِ وَكُتُبِهِ وَبِيَوْمِ الْجَزَاءِ, and to believe in His messengers, His books, and the day of resurrection. Okay, and he did not. He said, ولم يرد الشرائع التي هي مصالح الأمم على حسب أحوالها فإنها مختلفة متفاوتة. He did not, Allah Ta'ala, when He says شرع لكم من الدين, Allah legislated the deen for you, He did not mean, this is the words of Al-Qurtubi, He was not talking about the Shari'ah, relating to the benefits of the people, as based on their circumstances, because those Shara'i', those laws, sets of laws, those differ, from one nation to one nation. And then he cited the saying of Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala, لِكُلٍّ جَعَلْنَا مِنْكُمْ شِرْعَةً وَمِنْهَاجًا, and to each of you we made a Shari'ah, a set of laws, and a minhaj, a methodology or a path to to do it or to implement it. So the agreement here is that about the fundamentals of the deen, they are the same. And that's what the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in Hadith Sharif, when he said, "Al-anbiya'u ikhwatun min allat, wa ummahatuhum shatta, wa dinuhum wahid." The prophets are brothers from various mothers, meaning the same father, but the various mothers, and their religion is one. Okay, meaning they all share that common platform or the common beliefs in the oneness of Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala, but they differ in the Shari'ah, in the law, set of laws. Okay, go ahead, please. So now, when we talk about the technical definition or the Shari'ah definition, what are we talking about when they say that, when the scholars say that, what do they mean by Shari'ah? Shari'ah, Al-Imam al-Razi, and you've noticed, by the way, the different wording here and there, but in general, they are pretty much the same. the Imam al-Razi said هي الأشياء التي أوجب الله تعالى على المكلفين أن يشرعوا فيها, that it is all matters which Allah, the exalted, obligated individuals. Al-Mukallafin here, actually those who are addressed with the Sharia, those who are adults, sane, etc., etc. These are the ones who are charged with the Sharia of legal capacity, or legal capacity to discharge. Meaning what? These are the rules that Allah Ta'ala gave His servants, to embark on and to implement, to live by. Ibn Taymiyyah's definition, he said, كل ما شرع الله من العقائد والأعمال. And so here the Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah mentions that all the Sharia is really all the aqa'id and all the a'mal, or the actions, are part of the Sharia. So when we say Sharia, we refer to the entirety, they refer to the entirety of it. And Shawkani also define it as ما شرع الله لعباده من الدين. All that which Allah has commanded for His servants, with regard to the deen. That Sharia can be a set of beliefs that you believe in, or set of rules that you implement. So this is to further just elaborate on it. Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, as an example, he says in his book Al-Istiqamah, he said, and if the name of the deen includes the aqa'id and the a'mal, meaning the name of religion, the deen, includes belief systems and actions, فكذلك اسم الشريعة. Similarly, الشريعة, the name Sharia, ينتظم كل ما شرعه الله من العقائد، ينتظم كل ما شرعه الله من العقائد والأعمال. So the name Sharia includes everything which Allah Ta'ala legislated in terms of belief systems and actions. You have actually, nowadays, you might see the word Sharia also used differently, where they refer to it and, to mean really the Sharia as a set of rules, that the do's and don'ts as Sharia. So, for example, Sheikh Shaltut, rahimahullah, he wrote a book called Al-Islam, Aqidah wa Sharia. Islam is Aqidah and Sharia. And notice that this is used differently from the way that it was used by the previous scholars. And nowadays, even in academic, in universities that teach Islamic academics, you will find, for example, the Sharia as a terminology. It's normally used for the people who study fiqh and they study the practical aspect of it, if you wish. But you find the part of the Sharia that is related to the aqa'id and the ulum al-Quran, they refer to that as usul al-din. So just as a terminology. But for the classical work, if you wish, they refer to the Sharia to include the entirety of the message, the aqa'id and the ahkam. And we will see it, inshallah ta'ala, in shortly, just to see where the fiqh fits and where the usul fiqh fit within the Sharia, inshallah. Go ahead. Okay. And now this is the part about the Sharia. And so we said the Sharia as a term, it is used by in the early generations and throughout, really pretty much throughout history, to include the Sharia in its entirety. And the word fiqh now, similar to Sharia, has a terminology that or conventional meaning, and it has a linguistical meaning. So as a linguistical meaning, the word fiqh is derived from the root faqaha or faqiha shay, excuse me, and this is it means to understand. Okay, so in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about this meaning when He says, قَالُوا شُعَيْبُ مَا نَفْقَهُ كَثِيرًا مَا تَقُولُ. They said, "Oh Shu'ayb, we do not understand most of what you say." And the word nafqahu here is it means to understand. Okay, so Ibn Kathir, for example, when he said this, he said, يَقُولُنَا يَا شُعَيْب مَا نَفْقَهُ مَا نَفْهَمُ. We, oh Shu'ayb, we don't understand what you say. مَا نَفْقَهُ, we don't have the fiqh of what you say. It means we don't have the understanding of what you say. Similarly, Allah Ta'ala says, وَمَا كَانَ الْمُؤْمِنُونَ لِيَنْفِرُوا كَافَّةً. That فلولا نفر من كل فرقة منهم طائفة ليتفقهوا في الدين ولينذروا قوما رجعوا إليهم. يعني that, and it is not befitting that all believers, should go for for jihad, to go out at the same time, but or like me just Qurtubi's explanation. And he's saying that the believers, because there's more than one explanation for this, actually it's the reverse of each other. But Qurtubi says the believers are not to go out in jihad, at one, because if they all of them, because if all of them go out, then who's going to take care of the people who are staying behind in terms of the people who are not gone, such as the families and the offsprings, etc. But let some of them stay. يتفقهون في الدين ويحفظون الحريم. So let them stay behind and learn, the deen, to have the fiqh of the deen means to understand the deen, so that when the people come out from the battlefield, these people will meet with them and they will educate them, they will teach them. The same meaning, again, linguistically used in the Quran al-Karim, the saying of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Al-An'am, انظر كيف نصرف الآيات لعلهم يفقهون. See how we explain the ayat, the proofs, the evidence, the signs, Revelation, etc., so that they may understand. So this is just to say that the word fiqh, or the word al-fiqh, as linguistically, it means to understand. And this is what was used also in Hadith al-Sharif, when Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the hadith that's reported by Al-Bukhari and Muslim, Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam made dua for Abdullah bin Abbas. He said, Allahumma faqihhu fi din. Oh Allah, give him the fiqh of the deen. Here is not talking about a specific aspect of fiqh. He's saying to teach him, oh Allah, give him the understanding of the entirety of the deen. Similarly, the hadith of Abil Yaqdan, when he said that, radiallahu anhu, he said, سمعت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يقول إن طول صلاة الرجل وقصر خطبته أو قصر خطبته مئنة من فقهه. So that he's saying, I heard the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam says that the long salah of the person and the short of the khutbah, he's talking about khutbah al-Jum'ah, to make the khutbah short and the salah long, ma'innatun min fiqh, meaning what? A sign of his understanding. Understanding of the deen in its entirety, not just that detailed or regarding this or that. And then he continues, فَأَطِيلُوا الصَّلَاةَ وَأَقْصِرُوا الْخُطْبَةَ. So this is used in the Shari'i text in the linguistical meaning. Okay, continue please. So, and this continued linguistically, it used to be like this, and it used to be a reference when you say somebody has a fiqh of the deen, it referred to the understanding of the deen in its entirety. It was not simply dealing with one aspect, or only the aqidah, or only the ahkam, the Islamic rules, or the stories of the past, nothing like that. It was just general understanding. And that's why you find it in the early generations, after the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that was the way it was used, and that's why you see that Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah, explained it as or defined fiqh as al-fiqh huwa ma'rifatu an-nafsi ma laha wa ma 'alayha. Fiqh is for a person, is what a person must know of rights and duties of everything. What you should believe in, what you should what you should do, what are your duties, what are your obligations, etc. All of them fall under the word fiqh. And that's why there is a book attributed to Abu Hanifa, rahimahullah, that where it's in al-Aqid, that's called al-Fiqh al-Akbar, the great fiqh, and or the greatest fiqh. And that's the subject of Tawheed, or the subject of Aqidah. And again, so just to show that the word here, fiqh, initially it used to be used as a term amongst the people, amongst the early generations, as to understand in general, without differentiating the aqidah from the ahkam. However, with time, and this is when we say time, it is not that people came up with something new. It is you're talking about the study of Islam keeps growing as a body of knowledge. And the classification. So for example, before it used to be the knowledge of Islam was actually in one book. So you'll find the seerah and the fiqh and the hadith and the tafsir and the aqaid, all of them were in one book. But later on it became more classified, more organized, and especially with the growth of knowledge and the growth of the sophistication in approaching the organization of the text. So when we say that it is new, it's not something negative at all. Not only that, there is no, as convention, as long as the convention does not, or the term does not go against an established a hukum shari or something like that, then it is fine to use whatever terms you want. But here it became to be known as, what is fiqh? العلم بالأحكام الشرعية العملية المكتسب من أدلتها التفصيلية. it became and this tafsir, I mean, this definition is by Imam Usnawi, rahimahullah, and he is saying al-ilm, this is having the knowledge of the practical divine rulings, meaning ahkam shar'iyya, that were derived, earned, that are taken through reached at through its detailed evidence. Okay, this is in Nihayat al-Su'al. So when they became like this kind of definition, now restricts the subject of al-Fiqh to a certain subset, or to a subset of the Sharia at large. Because we said the Sharia contains the aqaid, contains the ibadat, contains the akhlaq, the muamalat, the do's and the don'ts, etc. And so now the convention started taking place where we were saying we are going to use al-Fiqh to refer only to the practical matters, the do's and don'ts. So let's just quickly go through what is the definition that they are using. And to understand it, because it is important, and its importance, inshallah ta'ala, will become more obvious later on. When we say al-ilm, or acquiring the knowledge, and here the knowledge, by the way, it means that it is the knowledge of the divine rules or the ahkam shar'iyya. The knowledge here, it means the various types of knowledge. So you have the knowledge that can be absolute or definitive in its nature, that it's not subject to questioning. That's called the qat'i type of knowledge, based or resulted from dalil qat'i, from a definitive or conclusive evidence. And then you have dhanni, or more probable. There's a margin of error in the understanding or in the authenticity of the text, etc. But it gives you that knowledge. It does not give you definitive knowledge. When we say al-ilm, it means for both. It means whatever the divine rules, whatever al-ahkam shar'iyya give you that knowledge, whether it is absolute or not, or conclusive or not. They are part of the definition of fiqh. So al-fiqh, in other words, is not only dealing with absolutes. It is not dealing with absolutes only. It does not deal with conclusive evidence only. It does not deal with conclusive conclusions only, but conclusive and inconclusive, or less than conclusive, let's say. That is the qat'i and the dhanni, and that, inshallah ta'ala, later on, that will be discussed properly. But the idea is, here it is to have that kind of knowledge, but not knowledge in everything. Because here he's talking about al-ahkam al-shar'iyya. Al-ahkam al-shar'iyya, when we say al-ahkam, it is the plural of hukum. Al-hukum is what is derived, what is taken, from al-adilla al-shar'iyya. When we say the hukum shar'i, remember we said Shari'ah. It is in reference to Shari'ah. So in other words, it is the ruling that came in Shari'ah. Whether it came again in a conclusive manner or inconclusive or less than conclusive, it does not matter, as long as it is from that body of revelation that came to Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and what leads us to take. So it is taken from the Islamic or from the Shari'i evidences, and to enumerate them, it is exactly what we mentioned in the subjects that we talked about: Al-Quran, Al-Sunnah, Al-Ijma', Al-Qiyas, as being, generally speaking, after the Quran, the Sunnah, the Ijma' and the Qiyas, they're generally agreed upon, etc. So what are these ahkam? Just like, again, what we mentioned, al-ahkam taklifiyya, for example. Al-haram, this is haram, this is fard, this is makruh, this is mandub, this is mubah. These are the ahkam shar'iyya that you are going to be knowledgeable of, dealing with the people's, dealing with that aspect of the Sharia. So automatically, when you say al-amaliyya, it means that now you are, or al-amaliyya, it means the practical. Practical automatically removes the things that are related to aqidah, removes matters that are not related to the of the predecessors or the past. It is or dealing with rational issues, such as for example, the part is smaller than the whole. The part is smaller than the whole. Yes, it's true, it's a fact. However, it is the study of that subject or anything in its nature is not under the definition of fiqh, right? So now we're restricting it to a certain area in Sharia, and the study of the language, even though that's the tool, it's the medium of communication within the Sharia between Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His ibad, His creation, you will find it is the study of that language is not part of fiqh. It's required for ijtihad, it's required for understanding, but it is by terminology, by convention, it is not a part of the fiqh. And when we say again, so al-amaliyya, we're talking about the rules that the actions the people do, such as as-salah, zakah, al-hajj, the contracts, marriage, divorce, etc., etc. So what about the other subjects that are remaining of the Sharia? They are studied in different areas. They're not studied under the banner of fiqh or under the definition of fiqh. And when we say, by the way, Shari'ah, here it's Sharia, reference to Sharia, we have to, this also emphasizes the source of law for the Muslim. That the source of law of the Muslim is not haphazard. It is not whatever people say, it is not whatever goes in the society today or yesterday or tomorrow. It's not what the people like or dislike. It is actually restricted to the Sharia, for it to be called Shari, for it to be called legal, for it to be called, legitimate. It has to go back to what was revealed to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Okay, and we say al-muktasab, that is taken, derived, deduced. It means what? There is a research, there is a study, thinking that takes place in the evidence, about the evidences, and from that knowledge, for that knowledge that results from the thinking and the evaluation, that is the conclusion that would be called under al-Fiqh. So which means, by terminology, by convention, what Allah Ta'ala revealed to Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam through wahi, etc., or what was received by al-wahi, here they are, some of the ulama, they take it out of that definition. When we say من أدلتها التفصيلية, from the detailed evidence, so here detailed evidence means the partial rules. So for example, when we say وَأَقِيمُوا الصَّلَاةِ, and establish salah. Well, there's an ayah in Surah Al-Baqarah that says وَأَقِيمُوا الصَّلَاةِ. Part of it is وَأَقِيمُوا الصَّلَاةِ وَآتُوا الزَّكَاةَ, and give zakah. Establish salah and give zakah. Where did you get this? From this part of the Quran Kareem. So when you say detailed or partial evidence, or detailed evidence, probably more accurate, but it means there is a overall kulli, something that is general, something that is wider than this, and these are just parts of the whole. So there is a dalil kulli, and there is a dalil juz'i or dalil tafsili, evidence that is whole, and that is, for example, Quran al-Kareem, as-Sunnah al-Nabawiyya, these are, ijma', these are the overall evidence. And then you have one text, one part of a text, etc., two texts, etc., but they're within that, underneath that. That is really where the rules are derived from, من أدلتها التفصيلية. So when Allah Ta'ala, for example, says وَلَا تَأْكُلُوا أَمْوَالَكُمْ بَيْنَكُمْ بِالْبَاطِلِ, and do not, the expression is, do not eat the money of each other's wealth with batil, with falsehood. Meaning, so the rule here, this is part of an ayah in Surah Al-Baqarah, and it means it's forbidden to take the money or the wealth of the people, the possessions, or the owner, what the others own, illegally. You cannot take that in illegitimate ways. When the Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, for example, says, لا يقبل الله صلاة من غير طهور, that Allah Ta'ala does not accept a salah without purification. So this, again, what is the rule? This is a part of the sunnah, that's the dalil kulli. And this is a detailed rule, one hadith that talks about Allah does not accept, subhanahu wa ta'ala, does not accept a salah, without purification. So this is a detailed evidence, and from it, we conclude that the salah, the tahara, is a condition, a requirement for salah to be valid. Okay? Let's go to the next slide, please. So the definition that we looked at was actually for al-Usnawi, And this is the definition of al-Amidi. Al-Amidi, of course, a very well-known usuli scholar. So he defined al-Fiqh as what? العلم الحاصل بجملة من الأحكام الشرعية الفروعية بالنظر والاستدلال. And this is the knowledge. Fiqh is the knowledge resulting from reasoning and demonstration, of most the detailed divine rule. Meaning what? It is here the Al-Amidi is talking about the knowledge, to call somebody a faqih if you wish. It means you have to know a sum of the Islamic rules. So the Islamic rules, or the fiqh here, is that knowledge that is taken with a or that is related to a large sum of the Islamic rules, what they call branches. And meaning branches here, the al-furu', as opposed to al-usul. Al-usul here, they refer to aqidah and things of this nature, the belief system. And al-furu' are the do's and don'ts. That's the terminology. And some people debate that terminology, by the way. Not the idea itself, but just the labeling of usul and furu' in this manner that they did, because they view Sharia as a whole. So they tell you there is no asl and fara in this way. But in reality, the definition of fiqh still remains within those detailed evidences. And of course, what Al-Amidi emphasizes here is that bin-nadari wal-istidlal, that there's a thought process that takes place in the matters of the matters of fiqh for it to be called a fiqh. Okay, so that's really what I want to discuss here about this. But this is basically the definition. And if you notice a difference between Sharia, which covers everything as a term, and between the al-fiqh term, which is related only to a subset of the Sharia. And that subset, that portion, relates to the actions of the human being. Every action that you perform, that a human being performs, will fall under one of the 5 categories. Muslim or non-Muslim, young or old, they fall under these 5 categories. And those categories, or those, they are actually the rules in the fiqh. And we'll see how usul is related to that. Go ahead, please. Okay. So here's the comparison, which pretty much we just said, that based on this definition, Sharia is more general, since it includes fiqh and aqidah together. And this is important, as we will come to see, inshallah ta'ala. This is important because when we say the Sharia is the entirety of the Sharia. Whatever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed to Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, it's called the Sharia. And that part of it is the practical actions and the rules regarding the actions. And as we mentioned, that knowledge, some of it is definitive and some of it is not definitive, meaning the conclusive versus less than conclusive in the meaning, probable, they call it qat'i and dhanni. But so both of them, they are in fiqh, and they are all part of the Islamic Sharia. Okay, so this is one way of looking at it when we look at it as a term, and this is of course in the later way when we say that the Sharia includes the fiqh and the aqid together. But Abu Hanifa rahimahullah, he viewed it as one. Sharia is synonymous to fiqh. Fiqh is synonymous to Sharia because again it is the understanding, and he viewed it as the understanding of what the person has in terms of duties and obligations. So that encompasses, so you have both approaches or both definitions of them. Now, you have people who differentiate between the two terms. And it even goes further than just simply in terms of classification. So for example, Dr. Ahmed Hassan said the Sharia is the textual law. So it's based on text. While fiqh is the derived law. Hence, there might be no disagreement over the Sharia where there is disagreement in fiqh, and say that the Sharia is textual, but the fiqh is derived. So that automatically separates and detaches fiqh from Sharia. and makes the fiqh now a different body. That's something that can be, we can disagree on. So the idea is that we don't disagree on Sharia, but we disagree on that. Another, Dr. Kamali also said, fiqh is often used synonymously with Sharia. Okay, fiqh is often used synonymously with Sharia, which is what we mentioned. Both of which refer to the general body of Islamic law. Although there is a difference between them in that fiqh consists largely of juristic interpretation, where Sharia bears a closer affinity with divine revelation. This differentiation in this way, where you say fiqh is reasoning, as if this reasoning is not based in the text, as if this understanding is not based in the text, it's not related to the text, directly related to the text, that does not exist. This differentiation, to say to view them as detached laws or detached rules, it is something that is erroneous. In reality, they are both the derived law and the stated quote unquote law. They are from Islam. And for example, when I'll give you an example, and this is, by the way, the same example somebody I was watching on YouTube mentioned, that this is the example to show the people the difference between the Sharia and fiqh, where the fiqh you can throw away his words, you can debate and you can neglect, but the Sharia, astaghfirullah, you're going to abide by it. So he said, for example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Al-Ma'idah, وَامْسَحُوا بِرُؤُوسِكُمْ, in the Salah, يا أيها الذين آمنوا إن قمتم إلى الصلاة فاغسلوا وجوهكم وأيديكم إلى المرافق وامسحوا برؤوسكم وأيديكم وأرجلكم إلى الكعبين. Oh, who you believe, if you get up to pray, wash your hands, wash your faces, and wipe and wash your arms إلى المرافق, to your elbows, including the elbows, and wipe your heads, and then translated poorly, and wash your feet. But here, the point here, وَامْسَحُوا بِرُؤُوسِكُمْ. He said, wipe your heads. So he's saying this ayah, this part of the ayah, wipe your heads, وَامْسَحُوا بِرُؤُوسِكُمْ, this is Sharia. Okay, nice. Now, but بِرُؤُوسِكُمْ, how much of it, because you have different understanding of the rule. Some people, like Shafi'i, said it's sufficient. It's sufficient, not that's optimal, but it's sufficient that you wipe, a little bit of your hair, and that should be fine. Others viewed it more, so there is a difference of understanding. So he said that those differences, fiqh and they're not binding to us. They're not binding to us. But regardless which way, when you do this, you render the very same text that you're trying to say is revered and not touched, you render it useless, because you're still facing the issue of how are you going to understand the text. And the question is whether the people who understood this text to mean the part of the hair or part of the head or the entirety of the head or etc. Did they do that away from the text, or it is because of the text and other texts that are involved? So if you are going to say this is not binding, and this is binding, what is binding? وَامْسَحُوا بِرُؤُوسِكُمْ, the meaningless? Is that what's binding? Or is there a meaning that is established based on the best of your ability, based on ijtihad, and based on and that would be the fiqh. But it's still, the text itself came in a Sharia. In the Sharia, it's part of the Sharia, everybody agrees on. And here the text itself is established definitively. It's part of the Quran Kareem. Yet the meaning of it in this Sharia, the Sharia brought this possibility of understanding it this way and understanding it this way. It's that those possibilities of understanding it are part of the Sharia. And this has to be really clear, so that, because now the consequence of it, they call this, and this is the new liberal, and I really don't want to get into much into it now, but the liberal approach and the idea of we need to, that the entirety of the fiqh, the body of fiqh over 1400 years now, this, most of it is not binding to us. Really what's binding to us is the Quran, and even the Sunnah is questionable, and so they are not binding. And so they call it turath, the literature or the heritage, something that, you can really, a heritage, you can dump it and move on to a better heritage, form a new one. So it puts, in reality, it detaches the ummah of its fiqh, of its history, and of its sharia. Because whoever comes up with any idea about how to approach the, or about this sharia, this part of sharia, such as this ayah, you still need to come up with an approach of how are you going to understand it. And that, and you have to come up with an understanding. And that understanding, is it permissible by Sharia, meaning is it consistent with the Arabic language, is it consistent with the view of the Sunnah, is it consistent, etc., etc. Then you can say this is a legitimate understanding or illegitimate understanding. And if it's legitimate understanding, that's part of the Sharia, because that the Sharia allowed it. A Sharia, gave it. Similar understanding, for example, and everybody probably is familiar with this. When Rasul sallallahu alayhi wasallam, said, whoever believes in Allah and the Day of Judgment should not pray al-Asr except in Bani Qurayza, and in a locality of a Jewish tribe. So some of the Sahaba, the Asr became late. So some of the Sahaba, they said, well, Rasul sallallahu alayhi wasallam intended for us to rush. And other people said, no, we are not going. So in other words, intended for us to rush and we'll pray on the way. Others said, no, Rasul ﷺ was literal in saying, you don't pray al-Asr until you reach that destination. So some of them did this way and some of them did that way. And the Rasul ﷺ approved both. That approval for the difference of opinion, that approval for the approach to the text, that approval for, that is part of the Sharia. And the opinions themselves, the understanding, and they are part of the Sharia. Otherwise, the Rasul ﷺ would not approve them. So and the reason why I'm emphasizing this point is to understand that we cannot detach, we cannot separate al-Fiqh as if we're talking, studying Greek, and all of a sudden now we read the Quran. It is not like that. Al-Fiqh is the study, the analysis of the detailed evidence of that are mentioned in the Sharia that relates to the actions of the human beings. So the idea, none of this is binding. So whatever the ulama said about the penal code, whatever they said about contracts, whatever, all of this non-binding. And this, of course, once I get to that conclusion, that's light for me, that because I need another system. That's my green light to go and westernize, if you wish, and come up with a foreign law. When for the law to be valid, when we said it has to be hukum shar'i, it has to refer back to the Sharia that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam brought. Okay. Okay, I think it is enough. Can you go forward, please? Okay. So this is just to see how they are interrelated and to see what the Sharia is. We said the Sharia is composed of the Aqidah, the creed, the belief in the belief system, and it also includes morals and ethics. It also includes, stories about the previous prophets and the previous nations for the moral of the story, for al-ibra, etc. And so that's Sharia. But in addition to it, it has the fiqh. And that's what we were just saying. The fiqh is related to the rulings, the haram and the halal, mandub, makruh, mubah. So this is the fiqh. And the fiqh here itself, as brought in Sharia, is either conclusive or probable, dhanni, or it has explicit source, or they have deduced from the source, etc. But these categories of fiqh, in terms of the certainty of the rule or not, etc., that is part of the fiqh that was brought to us by Sharia. So we take it as a whole, and I hope that this is clear. But this is exactly what we were just saying about. What we were just talking about. The Sharia contains all of that body, whether it is conclusive or less than that, whether it is probable, whether it is explicit in the command, whether it's implicit, all of these things are the subject of fiqh, and these are the subject, of the actions of the human beings, and they are part of our Sharia, whatever Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam brought. The next slide, please. Okay. This is now, we're talking about the third topic, and here I'm going just skim through it. Maybe if Brother Iyad next week, inshallah ta'ala, if he wants to go over it in more detail, you know, I mean, he can do this. But the idea that just to differentiate, to see, and whether you can call Islam a law or not, or Islamic, the Ahkam Shari'ah, Islamic laws or not. But to understand really, just as a background, you know, the idea or the theories of law. So you have, there are various schools of thought in the study of law and in the theories of what law is. So we can define it. One way of defining it is as the principles and regulations established in a society by some authority and applicable to its people, whether in the form of legislation or in the form of customs, which peoples recognized and enforced by judicial decisions. So it's just the law is basically certain principles regulating how the society is going to be to function. And these can come from legislation, like you know, you have the parliament, or you have like in the US, you have the Congress and the Senate, and the legislative branch, they come up with a legislation, or it can be even the customs, you know, of the people, you know, and they become, normally these customs become accept the norm in the society, and they are become enforceable by the court system. And here there are two main theories of law. There's what they call positive law and natural law. And the positive law, basically, it's a man-made system. It's a man-made law. It's a legislated system. It's a legislated law, but in some form or the other. So the man-legislated laws, they give certain bodies or certain groups in the society, they give them the authority, the privilege, you know, to define law, to define what is right and what is wrong, what is legal and what is illegal. And you know, we have you can positive law can further categorized, you know, basically into common law and civil law. Again, I'm really just skimming through it, and you can. If you're interested, inshallah ta'ala, I mean, I can send you some references or things that you can dig more into. But from a usul fiqh perspective, is just a overall comparison. Natural law, system of law, and this is the natural law, of course, is for in the eye of the beholder, in the eye of the believer. They believe natural law is something that's advocated, that its advocates believe that it is to be determined by nature, and thus it's universal. You know, and the natural law is often conflated with common law, and the two are distinct. But so natural law, so you know, they basically they view it to be something that's related to all mankind, and we see that in the declarations in the UN and other laws that govern human rights, etc. These are based on the concept that every human being is entitled for this. Every, you know, even though when it comes to the details about what are these natural laws exactly, precisely, they tend to differ. Okay, I'm running out of time. Go ahead, Muhammad, if you can just go further, please. Okay, just to again, actually, let's go to the next slide, please, and because that will do the comparison. This is it. Allah Jazak khair. And this is really the goal. First of all, just as a highlight, I'm just one brother was mentioning just yesterday that really it's inaccurate to compare one law to the other. So, and here we're not comparing one law to the other. We're giving some features that define or that are characteristics of laws. You want to define, you want to compare law against law. It does not work, because each law, as we mentioned earlier, they are part of a bigger framework. They're part of a bigger view of life, part of a aqidah, a view about how life should be conducted, how it should be organized. So you want to compare, you compare Islam against another system, for example, but not a law about, you know, do you imprison this person 5 years or 10 years, or this is the contract, this contract is allowed, that one is not allowed. That is an improper you know, comparison. But here, just as to describe the characteristics of these laws. So the Islamic law is, of course, the source of it based on our aqidah, our point of view, the Quran and the Sunnah, it is the source of it. And all the secondary or the subsets of sources of legislation result from the Quran and the Sunnah. While the man-made law, and that this is something that it's made by human beings, whether it is civil law or common law. The sovereignty here, at least in theory, given to the people. So the idea is who has the right to make right and wrong? That is human beings under the man-made law, versus in Islam, the source of law and the one who is sovereign and who has the absolute power for legislation is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The role of the mujtahid, the scholar, the mujtahid, is to understand the legal text and apply it to a given situation based on specific methodology. So the mujtahid does not add to the text, does not modify the text, does not come to the text with a preconceived notion, but actually own the job of the mujtahid, following that structured approach of usul fiqh, as we will become clear, is simply to understand what the legislator wants. And then they study reality, they take the law, the text which they think apply to this reality, and they implement it on reality through a specific methodology. But in the man-made law, representative legislates based on intuition and compromise. And this is something, by the way, you see it in the West a lot. I'm not sure in other countries, probably the same. They take pride in I'm able to compromise and reach across the aisle because of different party affiliation. So the idea of compromise is something that is major in the Western mindset. And that's so, but the idea is, in theory at least, that these people are legislating, they're making the law, and they may compromise it, they may change it, and again, in theory, because in reality, it's a very different aspect to it. The mujtahid does not have this right. The mujtahid cannot believe, I am convinced this is haram based on the evidence and based on the haram, but for you, here you go, it is halal. They don't have that right. The Islamic Sharia is concerned with morality and not just the law, and which is exactly different from the Western system, where they say that laws do not govern, ethics and morality. They do not govern it. They are separate. So you can be perfectly legal and perfectly unethical. So they are. But in Islam, it is not, because there is a foundation more than the world, or more than this. World that we're living in. It is something more. That's a belief, and that's the aqidah, and that's the concept of the hereafter. So even the law, it is related to the belief in the akhirah, etc., and that's how it is reached, and that's how it is implemented. But in the Western system, or in the man-made law, temporal. It is no relationship to life after death. Nobody knows who believes in it, who does not believe in it, but it definitely has nothing to do with the legislation aspect. The Islamic law has to do more than just of do's and don'ts, because there is a spiritual basis of the Islamic law. There is a connection with the creation, with the Creator subhanahu wa ta'ala, when we implement and when we deduce Islamic laws. And this is not the case in man-made law. It is limited to the do's and don'ts. Function by the letter of the law, and you're perfectly fine. But that's not the case in Islam. History of the pro bono, and this is basically the muftis, free counsel and helping the people who need it. But in the man-made law, lawyers always come on top. You go in a case, chances are you will be paying exorbitant amounts of money for you to get somewhere, and maybe you will not. Next slide, please. Okay, difference between Islamic law and man-made law, and this is just quickly, because I think we're supposed to break for QA now. There are many systems of law. So there are many systems of law, and each of which has, each system of law has defined sources. They have methods of interpretation, they have means of implementation, and objectives. So similarly, in the Islamic legal system, we have defined sources, and that's the Quran, the Sunnah, Ijma', and Qiyas. And of course, all of these will be discussed later, inshallah. There's a method of interpretation, that's ijtihad, and the means of implementation. In the body of fiqh, there are various systems of implementation implement a rule and which rule, etc. That is part of the legal system of Islam. And finally, there are objectives and the maqasid al-Shari'ah. What are the aims when you implement this system? You know, what are the aims or the goals that you are trying to achieve? What are the maqsad, the goal that you are trying to achieve by such implementation? So these things make the Islamic legal system actually a legal system. Next slide, please. Okay. Now, here, just very quickly, and unfortunately, I can't stay much longer on this because of the QA, but we, you know, some people ask, you know, look, I'm not going to be a mujtahid, you know, and so if I'm not going to be a mujtahid, you know, why am I studying usul fiqh? You know, and there are many reasons why. Just as highlights, understand how the hukum shari'i is derived. Understand how the ahkam shari'iyya in general, why do we say this breaks salah, this does not break your salah, this does break your wudu, this contract is haram and halal. Understand how did they come up to this? Is our religion, this is our deen. You know, it's important for us to know, because in Islam, alhamdulillah, there is no clergyman, there is no this classism between the masses and the you know, the elite. Actually, when the ilm, as Imam Malik rahimahullah mentioned, when the ilm becomes conclusive to certain people, only to certain people, that's when ilm starts dying. You want to understand how your deen works. And especially, you know, in nowadays when the deen itself, the deen of Islam, is confronted and attacked on every different level. You know, we need to understand how our ahkam shari'iyya are derived. And this, when you study the Islamic, the usul fiqh, you will appreciate the level of complexity of deriving laws. Maybe many of us have seen it that, you know, I don't know, why did Abu Hanifa said this? You have a text, you have this hadith that says this, you have a Shafi'i. I'm not sure how he, you know, people who by thinking that it is simply as simple, oh, there's a hadith that says this, there's, you know, and that's sufficient. It could be, if it goes through the rigorous process of ijtihad to understand, to say that this is the only evidence involved and this means this. But if people who think that they can eliminate scholarship and scholarly work for over 1400 years because I read a hadith in Ibn Hibban that says X, you know, studying usul fiqh by you know, that was that existed and developed, etc., throughout history, will give us a level of appreciation for the complexity of Islamic laws and the method. And the complexity here is something that's positive, not negative. You know, it's not a joke. It's not a you know, Islam for dummies kind of thing. It is people spend their lives, literally lives, studying, and sometimes barely they can do ijtihad in one mas'ala. You know, this is you know, just hopefully the usul fiqh will give us the level of complexity and appreciation of our Islamic law. Appreciate how the structured approach to deriving controls scholars' interaction with the text. And this is when we say structure, there is usul al-fiqh, there are principles that you're going to follow and you're going to define, you know, as most of the ulama have done. You know, they define the methodology that they're going to use in approaching the text. You know, and all of them, even those who did not define it, like Abu Hanifa, he did not verbalize it or did not codified it. You know, it was actually it existed and derived from his ijtihad, etc. He was following a very set methodology. It was not a haphazard approach. And what this does, it automatically negates the idea of rule manipulation. Because just like you write any paper in academia or you give a talk in a masjid, you'll have 5 people who are correcting you. If you're leading a salah, you make a mistake in a hadith, in an ayah, you know, you have 5 people correcting you. It's exactly like that when it comes to the usul al-fiqh. And if your ijtihad goes against the principles of ijtihad, the principles of understanding that you adopted and specified, you will have people critiquing you and criticizing what you have done. So the idea you come to claims like there's the patriarchy-driven fiqh, it was male-dominated. You know, that it is, anybody who understands, reads usul fiqh and reads the fiqh itself, understands this is nonsense, utter nonsense. No educated person would say such a thing. You know, you're talking, if we talk about, you know, when you say it's usul al-fiqh, it means that you have a methodology of approaching the text. You don't put the conclusion first, and then you start backpedaling. How am I going to make the text get me that conclusion? That's an illegitimate ijtihad. So if you, like now, the idea we can reinterpret Islam. We need to look at Islam from a feminist perspective. I don't know what that means. I honestly don't, because you have a structure, you have text, you have a language, you have, but to look at the conclusion prior to which aspect of knowledge, which aspect of science, would accept such methodology. I put the conclusion first and then I backpedal. It doesn't work like that. You don't put the cart before the horse. You have a structure of approaching the text, and you go within this structure to reach wherever the text, wherever that structure, wherever that methodology, those principles lead. You will say, to the best of my ability, this is the rule of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then you will see also, because of this, that you cannot deviate. You cannot, you have the structured approach to the Islamic text. You will counter the understanding that Islam is unable to solve these problems. You will see actually it's very well able to. And it can give you a rule from now, from the time of Rasulullah until the Day of Judgment. Not necessarily the rule that matches what somebody else adapted, but it will give you a rule nonetheless. And that's the idea of that. Does it have the ability to solve today's problems, tomorrow's problems? Yes, when usul al-fiqh are involved and the methodologies are in place, you can actually, without violating the principles that you have in the Sharia. And finally, just develop the understanding of how differences in usul al-fiqh can lead to difference of opinion. Many people, who did not study, or they don't have the background, they come and they tell you, I don't even know why they have a difference of opinion. There are many opinions, there are many reasons why, but one of them is that they adapted usul al-fiqh that differed in here and there. So there are main things that everybody agreed on, let's say, but there are other things where they differed, and based on that, these differences like that. I think I'm done. I think that's the last slide. Please, one more, Muhammad. Yes. Allah Jazakum Khair. I'm sorry for taking more than my time, but if you have a question, please feel free.
Yeah, so just for those, just as a recap, if you guys have any questions, please send them to either Brother Ziad, Brother Zaid, myself, or Sister Dania, and then we're processing these questions. But I'll go through and read them in order, inshallah. The first question is from Sister Hina. Does the meaning of Shari'ah also imply that it being non-exhaustive is leaving room for ijtihad?
Say it again, I'm sorry.
Does the meaning of Shari'ah also imply that it being non-exhaustive is leaving room for ijtihad?
That the Sharia is non-exhaustive, it means that, yes, it means that the text will be able to handle whatever issues until as long as the man needs it, as long as human beings need it, and absolutely, yes, it does do that.
Okay. Next question is by Brother Saif. Since we went over many scholars' views and definitions, they've labeled each fiqh and sharia in their respective labels. So won't there be a differentiation, or are we going to follow Abu Hanifa's synonymous view for this course? So this is with respect to which definition we chose for fiqh and sharia.
No, in the fiqh now, the fiqh, by the way, the madhab al-Hanafi, actually they took that definition of, that's the definition of Abu Hanifa when he was talking about the fiqh in the general sense, that it is talking about the sharia, synonymous with sharia. But actually, even the madhab of al-Hanafi, they went and restricted that statement to deal with the aspect of fiqh that we're talking about by adding one qualification that related to the actions. In other words, to make that fit the new definition, the definition of usul, the definition, of fiqh, they actually, even in the madhab al-Hanafi, did that. This is the early usage of the word, but the subject itself of fiqh and what it deals with, the haram and the halal, etc., these things are not a subject of debate amongst them. The approach that we're going to use, exactly what we defined, what was mentioned by al-Usnawi and al-Amidi, and which is the reality of al-fiqh. And this is there might be differences of wordings amongst the ulama, amongst the scholars over this, but to my knowledge, it is really pretty much the same meaning throughout. You see the difference between al-Amidi and al-Usnawi, you find them really, minimal technical things, but it's still the overall, it is the body of knowledge that is related to the, that's derived from the Islamic sources, from the Sharia sources, related to the detailed actions of the human being, or from the Islamic detailed texts related to the actions of the human beings. So that's really the approach that we're going to take. But in terms of are we going to follow Abu Hanifa or somebody else in terms of the definition? I just mentioned it. But overall, this is an introduction course. It's not really madhab specific. It's just really giving you an overall view of the usul. I hope that answers your question.
Okay. Next question. At what point does one differentiate between acceptable and non-acceptable ikhtilaf? Isn't any line that the scholars draw based on those scholars' understanding? So what is stopping someone from disagreeing on the line drawn? Or are there explicit instructions given in hadith?
Yeah. You see, Allah is clear. It's a good question. The question, the issue here is we're not talking about hypotheticals. There are differences of opinion even within usul al-fiqh. So you have people within usul al-fiqh, usuliyin, people of different madhahib. They differed on details of some of the aspects, like al-istihsan, like the issue of maslaha, like there are differences of opinion amongst the madhahib based on that. So it's not that there is no difference of opinion. And it's not hypothetical where what about if somebody disagrees, but they do disagree. But the question is it a disagreement? Like, for example, do I come with a disagreement where I nullify the Shari'ah, or I nullify with, I'll tell you that the Quran is not a source of, of knowledge. It's not a source of Shari'ah. The Sunnah is not a source of Shari'ah. Would that be acceptable? Of course not, because the evidence for it are conclusive. They are not subject to interpretation. You'll find, for example, everybody agreed on ijma', but what ijma' is, what is ijma', what is consensus, who's ijma', that they debated, and you have differences of opinion amongst them. The same thing with qiyas, and you have some people, like al-Zahiri school of thought, or Ibn Hazm rahimahullah, he went to the extreme of rejecting analogy altogether. But still within even the closer or the more, I hate to use the word mainstream, but the more of the other madahib, the four schools of thought, they still differed on the details of the topics of the subtopics of the qiyas. So they agreed on qiyas, but when do you use it? Do you use it before this or after that? What kind of illah would you use? The causality within the qiyas, they differed on those. So if the difference of opinion is something that can be tolerated within the realm of the Islamic text, then there's no problem. But it cannot be something that negates or eliminates the entire concept of following Sharia, and then we say, well, this is my ijtihad. Then that's a reject, because the evidence here are not subject to different understandings. I hope I answered your question. If not, please feel free to to follow up, inshallah, on the I think Google Docs or what they call it, Google something. Classroom. Yes, the Google Classroom, and inshallah ta'ala, I'll be more than happy to elaborate more.
Yeah, and someone had a quick follow-up question, and I will remind the attendees that there's going to be a particular section dedicated purely for difference of opinion and how to navigate that. I think that's week 18, if I'm not mistaken. But moving on to the next question. By Sister Tahseen, not to get into a huge discussion, but the study of fiqh is very important for us, as there have been many attempts to change fiqh, i.e. French fiqh and American fiqh, and attempts like that. Will this be touched upon in this course?
I think the probably under the subject of ijtihad, and I would touch on it, but it's not really, again, every place, every locality, every situation might carry its own unique set of challenges and problems that require an ijtihad. We people who live in the western part of the world run into issues that are totally irrelevant to people who are, let's say, in the Middle East or in other places in the world. But the question is, how are these rules derived? It's to address a specific problems in a location, yeah, if the problem exists there, but to give it a different flavor, if you wish, where you cross the lines of the proper ijtihad and the structured method of approaching the text, meaning again, just like we mentioned before, just because For example, if we, I want to appear more, of equality in terms of man-woman relationship, and I put rules that are put in the West, and we start questions that are real problems Muslims go through in the West, but start addressing them with that in mind, then this is a tainted, a tainted ijtihad. This is not a proper approach. You look at the problem, you look at the text, and at the end of the day, the rule is to the text. It's not to the likings or dislikings of people. So maybe I'm a bit sensitive to the idea of labeling the American Western, as ijtihad, but in terms of problems, there are problems, different places that require different, solutions. And maybe once we go through the course and you look at the issues that are, that once we're done with the sources of the Sharia and the sources of the law, and whether they are the secondary or what they call disagreed upon, etc., and you start seeing where things can become more detailed. But when you derive laws, yes, you have to understand the reality, but the reality can never be the source of legislation. It will have to always be the subject of the law, not the source for the haram and the halal.
Okay. Next question is by Sister Iman. Does fiqh not include rulings, تغير, beliefs, aqaid, and morals?
Does the fiqh not include them?
Yeah, rulings, beliefs, and morals.
No. As we said, in the early history of Islam, the word fiqh meant exactly what Abu Hanifa mentioned, the synonymous with Shari'ah, and it meant the understanding. Oh Allah, teach Abdullah bin Abbas, Rasul said, oh Allah, teach him, make him understand the deen. Just that's it, understand, general understanding. But later on, by convention, it became restricted, just like when we say al-Aqidah. What is al-Aqidah? They defined it as related to the things that you believe in, and they defined its sources of evidence, the aql and the shari'ah, and they defined the type of dalil or types of evidence for it. The scholars detailed it based on the subject matter. Same thing. Al-Fiqh was defined, and as a convention, as a technical term, to mean, amongst the jurists. So when they talk about the fiqh, they are referring to the knowledge that relates to the ahkam shari'ah, the do's and don'ts that are derived from the detailed evidence. So they're not even talking about the major evidence or the comprehensive evidence. They're talking about detailed evidence, because the comprehensive evidence, that would fall under another aspect of knowledge. Okay, so again, it's just by convention. It's not just like if you go to any science, you go into physics and they define atom, and that's the definition of what an atom is, and they run with it. And so they understand when they talk to each other about atoms, or what an atom is. The same thing when you talk about the fiqh, it is just a convention amongst the ulama of Islam to say, okay, this is what fiqh is related to, and this is what we're going to be what it is.
Okay. Next question by Brother Zakaria. In regards to an Islamic system of government, what would define the jurisdiction of legislators, if any? And this was, I think, during the discussion of legal systems.
Yeah. There is no legislative, in the Islamic system, there is no legislative body and executive, legislative, and judicial. That setup is not in Islamic, the Islamic structure. You have in Islam, in the political system, the head of state, the Khalifa, the ruler, adopts certain rules from Islam, whether by taqleed or by his own ijtihad. Certain rules he adopts them and he implements them on the people, because the people put him in power, for him to rule them by Islam. So he rules them by Islam, and whether these Islamic rules are taken from Abu Hanifa or Shafi'i, or he himself or is a mujtahid, is able to derive laws, he rules by them. But there is no legislative body sitting, and their rule is make laws. We don't have that in Islam, because if you do that, then again, back to it becomes a man-made system. That's a positive law, right? That's the positive law, and we don't have that in Islam.
Okay, moving on to the next question by Brother Abdullah. What is the basis for a mufti or scholar to issue a fatwa? And with respect to Sharia and fiqh, how binding is this on us?
If the mufti is able to derive laws, meaning is he a mujtahid or is he carrying a fatwa from somebody else? I'm not sure I understand, but the latter part, is he binding to us? Is his fiqh binding to us? You know, the ijtihad of anybody or the rule of anybody is not binding on anybody unless he's the only person or she's the only person who has that rule. You know, and you don't have access to anybody else, then you have to follow hukum shari, then because that becomes binding. But in general, you know, really the rule of no jurist has a rule, even though, and some ulama, some scholars said that no, they have a jurisdiction because they explained وَأَطِيعُوا اللَّهَ وَأَطِيعُوا الرَّسُولَ وَأُولِي الْأَمْرِ مِنكُم, and obey Allah and obey the messenger and those in command. Ulil Amr, they said that these are the rulers and the scholars, you know, but wallahu alam, it is not the case, you know. But anyway, it's maybe I can just elaborate on it inshallah ta'ala on the site and in the classroom, and I'll put the answer there.
Sounds good. Next question is by Brother Imran. How can we respond to some people that say there is no need to get into the complexities of difference of opinion since it causes differences and divisions? For example, in my conversation with someone about wiping over the sock, the person said just avoid the need to choose an opinion and go with the safest one, which is just to wash your feet every time when making wudu and no need to take any chances. Can we say they are making Islam more difficult than it has to be?
You know, it's not just a difficult or I mean, why the question is, why are we not able to even carry a conversation where I disagree with you and you disagree with me? Why are we not able to say, look, no, I'm convinced of this opinion based on a proper ijtihad, and you're convinced of that based on a proper ijtihad? Why can't we do that? And we elevate the discussion and we bring up our standards of thinking to accept the difference of opinion amongst the Muslims within the Islamic you know, circles of understanding. I think it is enriching, and if each of us is going to stop, you know, every opinion because I don't want to, you know, initiate a conversation with somebody else, this is actually a sad state, because we should be able to have conversations, and these are differences of opinion, and still we are brothers and we are sisters, and they're all within the realm of Islam, and they're all allowed by the Sharia, they're all part of the Sharia, so there's no problem at all. Now, if you talk about just from the mere rukhsa or permission to do or not to do, you know, I mean, the hadith of Rasulullah, you know, says, "Inna Allah yuhibbu an tu'ta rukhsahu kama tu'ta azaimuhu." Allah Ta'ala likes His permissions to be acted upon, just like He likes the obligations to be acted upon. So, if you are convinced that this is allowed and this is a rukhsa, this is a permission of Allah Ta'ala that you don't wash your feet for every salah, Allah Ta'ala likes that as well. But again, the bigger picture, I think the bigger issue is that, unfortunately, now, because there is no study neither of usul nor of furu' of the Islamic rules, of the fiqh itself, you know, really most of us don't know. And if you see somebody who's different from you just a little bit, you know, people freak out, and it's just a sad state.
Okay, next few questions, they are a bit, they might be a bit of a tangent, but if you want to kind of address the overall point. Brother Irfan mentions what to do when fiqhi rulings sometimes happen to be more draconic than what is secular, like triple talaq.
Yeah. You see, this is when we talked about usul al-fiqh, bridges the gap between the aqidah and the ahkam. You know, with all due respect, I would never call the Islamic rule more draconic. You know, it's an Islamic rule based on texts. You have difference of opinion on that as well. But I would say, you know, what the Muslim submits to what Allah Subhanahu wa Taala you know, prescribed, and without without thinking that it is harsh or so it is what Allah Ta'ala willed. But the bigger picture is that, you know, probably why would somebody, you know, again, part of the bad habits many of us have, the idea on the tip of tongue. So I would say it's not a matter of harsher, or because how will you assess it? How will we set a standard of this is easier, this is harder? Easier for one person, it might be harder for another person, because each person has their own circumstances. The hukum shari'i is not taken by the ease or the difficulty. The hukum shari'i is taken based on the strength of its evidence. And that's what Allah Ta'ala could question us for. So if somebody is convinced, whether as a mujtahid themselves, or based on taqleed, they're following a mujtahid, that they are convinced that if the person pronounces divorce 3 times, it happens 3 times. Or if it pronounces divorce once, it happens once, then it's binding to them. Just like that. You have many actions in the Western law, very minimal actions, where and they can be very problematic, legally speaking, for the person to do, where we think that it might be silly. And we have laws here regarding, let's say, casual drugs. If people sell, drugs and they're caught 3 times, the 3rd time it's for life. They're on jail prison, even though it could be something that is minor. It could be done simply because poverty or whatever. But I'm saying every set of system has to be viewed as a system, not as each one is difficulty, etc. And the authenticity of the system is based on its origin, right? And where did this come from? If it came from the Islamic text, from the Shari'ah itself, then it is valid. And if it did not, then it is not accepted by us.
Yeah, and I think there will be probably, not necessarily on this particular topic, but we can learn a lot from the presentation on determining the hakim, which I think is coming in a couple of weeks. So that might present us the right mindset for that. The next question is, I think it was a clarification of a previous one. Brother Khurram mentions, so the difference among scholars is in the methodology, or the usul, which leads to different rulings. Is that correct?
That's one of the differences. I mean, there are other differences. When the issue of ijtihad and the difference of opinion, and that's one of the topics, we'll talk about why actually happened, and we'll give examples. We'll take one example in one aspect of fiqh, or 2, and say, okay, this is why Imam Malik ended up here, why Abu Hanifa ended up here, why Shafi'i ended up here, why, etc. And partially, you'll find it's partially related to usul al-fiqh, not necessarily all the time. But because there are other factors that come to play. But definitely usul al-fiqh is one contributor to it. And just take an example. One mujtahid comes and says, I would take the hadith da'if, the weak hadith. And when they say hadith, weak hadith, they don't mean extremely weak. They mean there is some question regarding it. I will take it ahead of qiyas. Another person will say, no, I'll take qiyas ahead of that, or I don't accept the hadith da'if or the weak hadith altogether. Here, you got automatically, it's going to set you into different paths when it comes to ijtihad, as a quick example. But inshallah ta'ala, we will discuss the details of ijtihad and the difference of opinion, why they differ, and what it means for us, the muqallideen, the people who imitate such mujtahids.
Okay.
And again, just to reiterate, I'm sorry, Muhammad, just to reiterate, anybody who feels that the answer is inadequate, please just let me, put it on in the classroom, inshallah ta'ala, and I will get to it, inshallah, and we can have meaningful discussion.
Yeah, and we can create a discussion forum on the Google Classroom.
Yeah.
There are a few more questions, but in the interest of time, we're either going to answer them separately. We have them all recorded, and we'll try to answer them on the classroom if we feel necessary. There are a few others that I just want to quickly knock out. There is a question of, does the fiqh change with time? I believe that should be discussed in the question, or in the discussion of Islamic legal maxims, where we'll talk about some agreed upon maxims and then some up for contention. And inshallah, that will be addressed then. There are other questions that are outside of the scope of this class. And then there's the last question, but we are ending, we want to end inshallah right when we mentioned. So maybe we can leave these for the Google Classroom and we can post an answer in the next few days. But with that being said, I think we're good to conclude the class. I don't know if you have any questions or closing remarks.
Nothing. Just to reiterate what I mentioned before. Just my sincere advice: stick with it, and inshallah ta'ala there'll be supplemental readings and suggested readings. Hang in there, and inshallah ta'ala everybody will benefit. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك. جزاكم الله خير for attending. السلام عليكم.